Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us or for watching this back for the final in the Artist Talk series for PhotoIreland Festival. As part of the talk series, we invited a number of professionals from outside the art world to join artists in discussing the number of issues and themes within the presented projects. By inviting external professionals, we aim to investigate how can photography and the arts be interpreted into other disciplines and into our social lives. I want to make you aware that the conversation is being recorded and it will be shared on our website for those who can make it. And so questions and comments are very welcome, and you can put them in the chat or at any stage, or at the end you can use the raise your hand function to speak. And today we have two very interesting people. We have artist Sheng-Wen Lo and investigative journalist Maria Delaney. So I'd like to just briefly introduce them before handing over. Maria Delaney is an investigative journalist for Noteworthy, which is a platform by Journal Media, publishers of Ireland's leading online news source. Recently, she spent a number of months investigating the fishing industry in Ireland as part of Noteworthy's Net Loss project, which examined overfishing, fishery controls, and transparency in the sector. Sheng-Wen Lo is a Dutch-based Taiwanese artist interested in relationships between non-human and societies. In his work, he questions and analyzes our current human-animal relationships using a number of technological mediums, such as video games and still and moving images. His practice is not just that of an artist, but also as a scientist. His work is critical, but with humor, he presents us with ways how technology turns animals into data and a product. In doing so, he brings forth questions of ethics and the cost of progress. Sheng's work TUNA is currently exhibited as part of the main group show Bite the Hand That Feeds You in Rathfarnham Castle, Dublin, running until the 2nd of August. So maybe if I can hand over to Maria, who is kindly moderating and interviewing Sheng today.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Julia. I'm delighted to be here, and it's great to interview Sheng today, especially in light of my recent investigation into overfishing. But I suppose I'd like to just start by asking you, Sheng, you were saying that the relationships between non-humans and society, so I suppose animals and society, have fascinated you since childhood, such as questions like why do people love and pet certain animals, and why do people eat certain species but not others? So I suppose I was just wondering why you're interested in this, and I suppose what got you started into your work on this.
Yes, I grew up in Taiwan, and I can remember a lot of incidents that I have that involves non-humans, especially animals. And one of them is quite special for me. Is during middle school, I had this science experiment with hermit crabs. And long story short is that during the process, I accidentally killed a lot of these crabs, and based on my own sensory experience, I tried to warm up the crab by giving them room temperature water, but they of course are cold-blooded animals, and that killed them. So that is an incident that stayed with me. And another incident during this period of time is that I visited a scientist when I was 15 years old, also doing hermit crab experiments, and the scientists are not treating the crabs very well, and that incident also sparks my interest in this whole science worship scenario that we are living in this society, that everything has to be scientific, but nobody, or we are questioning science less and less now, and I found it problematic. So these animal incidents eventually evolved, and they stuck with me. So I wish to not reconcile with them, but to take them as part of me and move on with my limited set of skills. So that is my motivation for these projects.
Yeah, and a lot of your projects involve water-based animals, and I suppose they are a type of like a species, like the sea-based creatures, river-based creatures that perhaps people may not care about as much as maybe cats or dogs, or kind of more cuddly animals, I suppose, that people generally would have as pets. Like, do you think, I suppose, from your experience of examining tuna or eels, or I mean, we'll discuss more about those projects, but like, is there a bias against water-based animals?
I think the problem is a visual one. Normally, we see a lot of non-humans on land, but our impression towards the sea is very abstract. We often say that we know the sea, but sometimes we only, that only means that we know the beach, we know the surface of the sea, or we know the river, we only know the surface of the water and the path that we traverse, which is on above water actually. And what's happening beneath the water is something that remains very abstract for people and for me as well. So the fact that we normally cannot see something often has a dire result that we do not have an idea of what's going on, and we tend to ignore it because it is not registered with our sites. And so that's perhaps when creative practices involving maybe investigative journalism or other creative means may come into place.
Yeah, and I suppose, speaking of that, like as part of my work on overfishing, that's kind of something that a lot of people remark to me, that like fishermen and environmentalists alike, that a lot of people just aren't familiar with what's under the water. And it does play a role in perhaps, you know, the lack of understanding in terms of overfishing or the environmental impact of pollution on the sea. And it is something that like did crop up a lot. And even in Ireland, which is an island surrounded by the sea, like a lot of the people who aren't fishermen and who aren't working on the sea just kind of didn't, you know, the fishermen were saying they just didn't understand, I suppose, some of the issues. And I suppose that kind of leads us into one of the first projects we want to discuss, which is the FEEL project, or the F-EEL project. And maybe you can just, I think you have some slides on this, Sheng, and we might just talk through what you discovered and I suppose what inspired this project. And I suppose you just tell us about it. It's about the obstacles that eels face on their journey. So I'll just hand it over to you to tell us about a little bit about the background to the project and what inspired it.
Okay. Can you see my screen now?
I can, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So this project is about European eels, which is a fascinating species. They can live up to 80 years old. They were born in Sargasso Sea, that is near Mexico. So they travel a long way, 6,000 kilometers to reach Europe. And during their long lifespan, they will have to face multiple challenges. A lot of them are actually imposed by human. Specifically, when they reach the Netherlands, where I live, the Dutch are very good at building dams. So the hydraulic barriers are oftentimes engineered so that they form virtually impossible barriers for migrating fish, and that includes the European eel. And other significant problem that they will face is illegal poaching, where people still hunt the eel larvae, the glass eels, illegally, and ship them to East Asia, where I was from, in China, in Taiwan, or in Japan. And it's a very lucrative business. The money involves rivals that of the drug money involves in Europe. And that is, people seldom talk about eels, but we often talk about drugs. And there, of course, are other issues such as pollution, water contamination. So I was commissioned by this organization, Embassy of the North Sea, which is an organization focusing on North Sea agendas. And last year, they asked me to do an interactive project about eels. So eventually, I came up with the idea of making an escape room that that kind of brings the experience of European eels to the audience directly by designing several contraptions that mirrors the hardship of the European eels.
Yeah, and I suppose like escape rooms would be, I absolutely enjoy escape rooms. They were one of my favorite activities before the pandemic. So I was delighted when I saw this project. But why do you think, like, I suppose that people need to experience these obstacles for themselves, like in order to kind of understand the issue?
We live in a human designed world, which means that everything that we encounter in daily lives are basically designed for humans. And that includes the road we walk on, the bridge we cross through. But these, for example, the roads are not necessarily the best surfaces for other species, plants and animals alike. So what I did with my co-creator, Yifei Chen, who's an industrial designer, is that we designed a space that is not designed for human. And that is seldom experienced by us in daily life. So it's a space which you enter individually, and you get to have this experience of a scenario that is not designed for you for about 30 minutes. So for us, so for the audience, perhaps it's a game, it's something exciting, maybe a little bit scary. So it's kind of like a tuned down experience of what it is like to be a non-human. But for non-humans, of course, this is not a game, this is daily life, but maybe 100 times more dangerous. So for non-humans, sorry, for the audience, but perhaps they feel scared inside this space, which, by the way, most parts are in total darkness. I just light it up to take some pictures. If they feel scared inside, perhaps this is the moment when we can ponder on perhaps what it is like to be an eel, what it is like to be a non-human in this human designed world.
Yeah, and I suppose like maybe you can talk a little bit about some of the obstacles that we saw some of them on the screen there, but I think you have a video we can kind of look at while we're talking, but like some of the obstacles that you recreated that eels would experience. So I suppose here we have something like a turbine in the water.
Yes, remember the people pass through in total darkness, so this is infrared. At the beginning of the game, there's this huge turbine which correspond to the hydraulic barriers, like a pumping station or hydroelectric station, which oftentimes has high frequency turbines installed. That is very lethal for most migrating fish. And for the second stage, there is this huge wall that people has to cross through. They can use either one of the system that we designed for them. They can either climb up a strange ladder, like this guy. He's climbing up this ladder. He doesn't know how to use it, but then there's this aha moment and he realized how to use this ladder. So in reality, there's also a fish ladder that human designed for fish. But there's, of course, no guarantee that human knows how to use it.
Perfect. Yeah, so like I suppose that kind of segues into like I suppose that's the kind of obstacles that eels and other fish face that are by humans. But I suppose one of the biggest threats that people would come to mind when we think of fish is overfishing and the fish we eat, and are we actually doing enough, I suppose, to ourselves and policymakers and government to combat this? And I suppose that's something that I would have looked at from an Irish perspective and found things like over 30 tons of threatened fish being discarded. So that in terms of, that's one impact of overfishing, where fish are caught and then discarded and possibly killed in the process, depending on the type of fish. Or things like control issues, where there's kind of a reduction of inspections and boardings and things like that to make sure that fishers are kind of doing the right thing. But I suppose from your point of view, you looked in your tuna project at overfishing in yellowfin tuna. So maybe like, why did you look at that particular species, and is it something, and like, I suppose maybe you can talk about the artist perspective in that. And again, we have some slides kind of just to show you what Sheng did with his play in the background.
So I was involved in this residency that is situated on a fishing vessel. Actually a former Polish fishing vessel that is docked in the Netherlands, converted into an art space. So on that vessel, I was sitting in this chamber that used to be filled with fish. So I thought that, oh, I should maybe do something about fish. And tuna is actually one of the fish that I usually bought in a can in 2017. And I did a little research and found out that at 2017, that this yellowfin tuna or big-eyed tuna, that they are both listed as vulnerable in the IUCN this list. The conservation status that rivals that of the polar bear and giant panda. But we can buy this fish on the shelves of the stores very easily. So that sparks my interest. So why can we buy this fish if it has a vulnerable conservation status? So that's when I had this idea to perhaps create something that is related to overfishing, and specifically the method that we choose may affect the results. So at that time, I don't have access to a yellowfin tuna, though I was a photographer. But at that time, I cannot access any tuna with my camera. So at that time, I was also involved in making video games. So that is when I thought that maybe I should build a video game that put the audience in a front row seat and install it in a space that used to be filled with fish in this fishing vessel. So this space is the belly of that fishing vessel. And in this game, it is very easy for people to experience overfishing. So the goal of this game is to catch as much fish as possible. And there's almost no text explanations besides the goal and controls. So when people start playing this game, they soon they will be confronted with this ocean with no fish whatsoever. And they will so they have 3 minutes to do this. So they will face with 95 seconds of silence in this game. That they will start wondering what's going on. But at the end of this game, there is this high score list. So in this game, there's actually you can catch like 482 fish. But if you are a guy who normally overfish, you only catch like 19, and there's no more fish in the water anymore. So there, the audience has to find out a strategy of how to make it sustainable, which is sometimes you have to leave the fish alone, and the population will return. And when you catch them again, you will be rewarded with actually more fish if you deplete the ocean in the very first minutes. So that is basically the dynamic of the game.
Yeah, and I suppose like what that's kind of a way of like, I suppose, explaining sustainability in terms of like tuna to audiences. Like I suppose in terms of my job as an investigative journalist, like we kind of, you know, show data, like have stories from people, talk to people. Like I suppose, what do you think of the audience reaction in terms of your work, and how does it tie in with like other forms of media like journalism and that kind of way, I suppose, in, like, do they all add up to kind of a big picture of what's happening?
The audience reaction is actually quite fascinating for me, and that is totally not expected when I made the game. So for example, when the audience see this scenario where there's no more fish in the ocean anymore, they ask two questions from my observation. The first question is, where are all the fish? Where are all the fish? And the second question is there anywhere else I can go? And that is actually the exact two questions that the fishermen in real life ask when they deplete the ocean. Where are all the fish? And is there anywhere else I can go to catch fish? And that is shocking because we naturally think that we are not the culprit of this issue. And the audience, some of them, at least some of them, realize that, oh, later on in the stage that they are the one who took all the fish. So this revelation came afterward, that after these questions, that where are all the fish? Actually, we took them. We took all the fish. but it is shocking for me how this instinct to question rather ourselves, but the environment is quite natural. I mean, to me as well, and to the audience, we naturally question the state, but we kind of like exclude our actions in the process, and that is quite fascinating for me. So the game actually has an interesting mirror of it's like in real life, the fisherman is also playing a game, but it has a real consequence. And I'm not sure how this relates to other media, but I found video game quite interesting, and sometimes even political, because it allows the audience to take the front row seat and execute his or her decision, and has and that has simulated consequences, which mirrors the real the real world, or what's really happening.
Yeah, and I suppose that was similar with your field project as well. Like, was it important to you that audiences interact with the exhibitions and kind of, you know, like have a real life experience of what's happening to these animals or non-humans?
Oh, sorry. Can you repeat the question?
Oh, sorry. Yeah. So I suppose that's kind of similar to your, like, the audience interaction is kind of similar to your field project. Like, both of them have a big element of audience interaction. Like, do you think that that's important to your work, that audience kind of have a real life element to what's happening to these species or non-animals?
I would say that for me, the most important thing in my work is it shouldn't be something like a didactic. I mean, it shouldn't be something like telling people what to do and what not to do, but rather smuggle something into the audience mind. I mean, if we are traditional activists, sometimes we tell people directly what to do and what not to do, and sometimes that works very well, but it doesn't work for everyone. So sometimes we have to, I have to take a step back and make something that is seemingly harmless, seemingly humoristic. And in the process, maybe I can smuggle one or two questions into people's mind, and perhaps they can think about it. And also I can think about it by doing these projects. So whether the project should be really interactive or not, or resorting to direct experience, that really depends on the tools I have and my skill sets, and also if it is suitable for the project.
Yeah, so like you're saying that you don't want to maybe tell people what to do. You can probably stop sharing your screen now, actually, Sheng.
Yeah.
So yeah, like, so you maybe don't want to tell people what to do, like you're saying, But I suppose one of the questions that people might have is, what can they do? And maybe your projects aren't telling them what they can do, but I suppose that's something that I was looking into in terms of the government and policy makers and that kind of aspect. Like say in Ireland, we found that there was a call for greater transparency in every element of fisheries, such as fishing quotas, and like say Ireland pushing for a higher limit in terms of quotas and things like that. And then like say regulators of fisheries or like inspectors of fisheries, just kind of what actions were being taken and that kind of thing. So like in terms of you, like what can people do, and is it up to people themselves to look at this, or is it up to an artist to kind of help people with what they can do?
I think artists is just like everybody else. We are human. We are not special people. So artists, yeah, it's just an average citizen, I think. And so by that I mean that maybe everyone has their own front line, whether you are a journalist, whether you are an artist, or if you are a chef, an accountant. Maybe everybody has their own front line, and everybody may find their own discourse in challenging the status quo. And a lot of governments or regulatory systems will tell the people to read the certificate of these consumer products. And of course, I think that certificates are generally a good thing because they provide a method of regulating the products and mass production. However, the problem is that sometimes we tend to blind trust the system. Sometimes we trust for example, the fair trade system, the organic system, or in fishery, there's the MSC system or the MSC council that regulates whether the food is sustainable, the pot is sustainable or not. Sometimes people, when they go to the supermarket, we think that, oh, we already played the role because we read the labels, we read the certificates. Which is nice, but the problem is if we always blindly trust the certificates, unfortunately, corruption will eventually happen. And that is what I experienced in Taiwan, where people blindly trust the government's food safety certificates, and it turned out that the system is quite corrupt. And now nobody trusts the government anymore. It's a good question. It's a really good question, Maria. What we can do, or what can we do? And I don't have one answer to fit all, but perhaps we can ask questions from our position. We can try to ask question to the product provider, or to ask questions to the vendors or the people who give you food. If we collectively ask more questions, naturally there will be a pressure going on between us and the system that is providing these commodities, in this case, the fish.
Yeah, and I think that's a really similar parallel to what an investigative journalist does. So like you're trying to, you inspire people perhaps to ask more questions and as you say, like to kind of challenge the status quo. And I suppose as an investigative journalist, like we are asking questions constantly and listening to people and kind of hearing what the issues are and stuff. So it kind of is a similarity there, I suppose, in terms of the role of the artist and the role of like the journalist or wider media. But I think that's a good kind of segue into perhaps questions from the audience, if they have any. Julia, I might hand over to you to moderate that.
Thank you so much, Maria and Sheng. That was super interesting. Yeah, if anybody has any questions, you can put them in the chat or comments, or you can raise your hand. I suppose maybe I can kind of start with my own comments. I don't really have any questions. Yeah, I think, well, one thing that was really interesting, what you were just saying, is kind of this role of the artist, role of the journalist, or indeed role of, like we previously, in our previous talks, we had, you know, kind of other experts, like people that are working in technology, for example. And it was always interesting to kind of see the similarities and the difference between all these jobs and practices. Because I suppose for me, one of the roles that, how I see a role of an artist is kind of like a mediation, a communication. So similarly to, for example, journalism, you kind of, there's this kind of, on both sides, there's this responsibility of communicating or mediating information. And I think that's, yeah, I think that's really interesting what you were saying. I also really like how Sheng phrased it about smuggling questions into the audience's mind. I really love that phrase now. And yeah, I think that was, sorry? Somebody said something?
Yeah, I think we have a question there from...
Oh, Lily. Yes, of course. Hi, Lily. Please go ahead.
Hi. Yeah, okay, so I hope you can see me.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, this is nighttime. So Sheng, nice to meet you. I wanted to ask you about your work in China or Taiwan, where we're all from. We had TBA 21. I think it's a German collective that came out to, can you hear me all right?
Yeah.
Okay, came out to Singapore, where I live, and they had spent quite a bit of time going through the Pacific Islands, and it was definitely overfishing and also deep sea mining. And the islands are very small and not very powerful, and so the whole issue of capitalism was very big about development and well-being of the islands. So in the conference that we had, I said I asked a question about so who is behind all this consumption, and the all this fish products, and so I brought up the issue of China. I said, and the question is actually the role of the artist as not just documenting the issue, but also as an advocate, right? Now, if you cannot get into the advocacy yourself, do you hand over the advocacy, as in like you're kind of like a content creator for people who are whose job it is to advocate a certain thing? So let me ask you about fish and China, because coming from China, you would know that seafood is a real big deal for us. And so here you are, you're living in Europe, so your projects are very interesting. Have your projects traveled to China? What has been the reception? And do you find allies in China or Taiwan or Korea or Japan? Let's just take North Asia for the time being, but just focus on China. So do you go to China with your projects, and what's the reception there?
Well, unfortunately, I'm not from China, so I rarely actually travel to China. Some of my work did travel to China, but not this particular project. However, I do find it a very interesting place. I do some of my projects in China. But the reaction is quite interesting for me to observe as well, how the audience interact with my work. Sometimes people don't get it at all. Sometimes people are quite surprised at it. But however, my point is not to really evaluate my work based on how effective it is, how far it reaches, and how many people it touches. You talk about the issue of advocacy. That will inevitably lead to the question of evaluation, how to evaluate the effectiveness of your work, and or my work. And I find this a little bit a little problematic because I don't tend to evaluate my work based on how this work will perhaps uh, change one region, for example, China or Taiwan's mentality. I don't aim on that. I believe I would take a more humble position and saying that, well, if my project can reach one people, that is enough for me, or one person. That is for me, that is quite rewarding, because I can never imagine what that person will do after he or she really takes in my work. And for me, that's already rewarding enough for me, having one people really takes in my work and perhaps do something else that I can never predict. So I'm sorry, it's maybe off topic to your question, because I'm not familiar with the Chinese regime and the system that they impose on the ocean. I read about some of them, but I'm not an expert on South China Sea. I'm aware of the overfishing issues, and perhaps I will research them when I go back to Taiwan in the next couple of years. But thank you for asking the question.
Yeah, and I suppose, Sheng, you just kind of brought up some interesting points on advocacy there. So, like, I suppose that would be interesting from like a journalist perspective. Like, you're not supposed to advocate on a certain issue, you have to present the facts, and the facts kind of speak for themselves. And I suppose from your point of view, just to follow up on that, like, do you think artists should be advocating for issues such as overfishing, or is it more just kind of presenting your work and kind of seeing what happens?
I think art is I think we have to be aware that the audience of art is not as wide as other conventional media, such as, for example, The Guardian or National Geographic. The audience of art sometimes is much smaller, and sometimes even smaller than traditional activistic scenarios or circumstances. But however, art has a very special quality, is that the composition of the audience is heterogeneous. And that means that the audience can be anyone. And it is great that a lot of audience do not agree with what you are trying to convey, and that is a blessing, I think, because the art form, no matter photography or installation or interactive media, can really break through the comfort zone, can really break through the bubbles that we are oftentimes encounter with traditional activism. Like, and when my friend as an animal activist, sometimes they find themselves inside a comfort zone where all of their audience are already animal lovers, and of course that's not saying that animal activistic people has less reach. Actually, they have more reach, but it naturally but people naturally form a group, and sometimes a bubble is formed. But whenever I show my work, either in China, in Taiwan, or in Europe, there are audiences standing up, trying to challenge me, and try to say that I'm wrong, trying to say that something is off, something calling me a hypocrite, which is I believe that is a very nice thing, because there is a conversation going on between the audience and the medium and myself. And for me, I really enjoy these conversations, whether they are heated or not. If people are raising questions, and I think that's a good thing. And my point is that in my works, I don't have conclusions built into my work. I do not advocate on any certain points and believe that people should do this or not. My point is, like Julia mentioned, is to sparkle questions, is to raise questions. Because I don't believe in a static conclusion, because we are in a dynamic world. So if there is a conclusion going on, it should be dynamically optimized through time. So there's no static conclusion. And in order to achieve a dynamic conclusion is to not stop discussing. And so discussion became the key word here. And question is, asking question is the first step of having a discussion. So that is the small logic behind my project is to raise questions, and in a more perhaps in a fun way.
Perfect. Thanks very much, Jenna. Let's hand you back over to Julia.
Thank you so much to Lily as well for the questions, and to Sheng and Maria for the whole conversation. I think it was really insightful, and yeah, I just think it's very interesting, a lot to take in, and indeed, yeah, there is no kind of conclusions, and I suppose that's where it's interesting to you need to kind of stay informed and to see other people's perspectives as well, whether they're artists or scientists or journalists, to consider all those perspectives. I suppose before we go, I would just like to bring your attention to the two final events that we have this year, this month rather, for the festival. Tomorrow we're launching Over Journal Issue 2, which is the critical journal of photography and visual culture for the 21st century. And on Saturday is the last episode of the Critical Recipes channel, which is called Cooking Potato Stories by artist Ana Nunez Rodriguez, with a special guest, Regina Sexton. I'm just going to pop both links in the chat for anybody who's interested in registering. And I don't want to finish without saying thank you to the festival supporters. This year has been kindly supported by the Arts Council of Ireland, Dublin City Council, and the Office of Public Works. And the presentation of Sheng-Wen's work was additionally supported by the Mondrian Funds.
Hey,
so I would just... Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Go on.
I'm not ready to let this one go yet. So can I just ask Shen another question?
Sure.
Yeah, okay. So, all right. Let me ask the question a little differently. I understand what you said, and I understand the position that you've taken, but a very overused cliche, all art is political, right? In some ways, and much of your work, I thought of what I saw was actually visualizing a problem, and there was something kind of uncomfortable about the issue, whether it is and it was it's about survival of fish as well as survival of ourselves, and there were ethical questions being asked. So I understand where you're coming from, and I like the word smuggling in a notion, and I know what you mean about I'm not trying to save the world. If I can get one person to ask good questions, that's great, and I don't even need to know who this person is, and that's kind of my attitude as well on my own art projects. But let me ask you about allies. Certainly along the way, people have approached you, or you must have thought, well, this really should get the kind of distribution that you're kind of looking for. And as much as you don't want to be advocating or be an activist, you're very close to it always. You're actually advocating something. And so maybe it's not you doing it, but do you find that you have this urge to find a collaborator or an ally and says, look, I've got the content. This is really, it's put together already, use it. Do you find yourself in that situation, or do you look for it?
Yes, definitely that for me as I don't call myself an artist, but maybe some people that do creative practices. I believe that for me, it's a blessing if I can work with people coming from different backgrounds and perhaps channel it through their discourse. Of course, that is a real blessing. And that is exactly what I've been trying to do with the field project as well, collaborating with the Embassy of the North Sea. And through the EO project, we work with marine biologists and also marine structure designers. And I learned a lot from these discourses, and the work is actually channeled through their discourse, and I found that very, very rewarding, and that is, I believe that art or creative practices, if applicable, should always reach out. Like Maria also mentioned, that working with different aspects of the topic is truly important, rather than forming a cocoon around ourselves. And we should reach multiple aspects. I believe not only allies, but also people that don't agree with you can be a very interesting person in the system of work creation. Because oftentimes when we try to create something, or at least when I try to create something, I tend to build a prejudice on an issue, but sometimes that prejudice can be challenged. So that is what I learned through my process by also talking to the persons that is not agreeing with me on certain issues. And I learn from, I try to learn from different voices and different sides. And of course, I can never reach the truth, but I can try my best by letting my antennas free of too much personal prejudice, by allowing different voices from different perspectives. And perhaps your worst enemy can be sometimes your best ally, and that is what I experienced.
Good. Okay. Thank you. Thank you for indulging me, Julia. And
no, thank you for your
all best.
It's always welcome. Thank you so much again, Maria and Sheng, and the audience. Yes, sorry. Yes, thank you, and we will see you hopefully again this week for the 2 events that are in the chat. And otherwise, you can watch back previous events on our website as well if you missed anything.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Julia.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Maria. Thank you, Lily.